We continue to cover the fallout from the phone call between U.S. President Joe Biden and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, when we were told Biden delivered very strong words to the Israeli leader about what Israel needs to do now to prevent further civilian casualties. Joining me now to discuss this and other issues, Democratic Congressman from Washington State, Adam Smith, ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman, thanks so much for taking the time.
Well, thanks for having me on, Jim. I appreciate it.
Just spoke to a spokesperson for the Israeli government about this demand from Biden to Netanyahu, saying Israel must now come out with a series of concrete, measurable steps to avoid further civilian casualties, particularly among aid workers. And reading his answers did not seem that there was a great deal of urgencies, at least yet, to answer that call. And I wonder, do you believe that President Biden has applied enough pressure on Israel to limit civilian casualties, allow more aid into Gaza?
Well, first of all, I think President Biden is taking the right approach in urging Prime Minister Netanyahu, to focus on the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is enormous right now. And I think it's clear that Israel isn't doing enough to make sure that humanitarian assistance gets in. So focusing attention on that, I think, is absolutely appropriate. I mean, go back to, October 8th. Israel was, no food, no water, no nothing, and they were reacting out of anger. And I understand that on October 8th. 6 months later, it's clear that the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza is, number one, a humanitarian catastrophe that we all ought to be concerned about. But number two is undermining Israel's ability to achieve its own security. Now, to the specific question of whether or not President Biden is doing enough, what I think the reporting hasn't done enough of is to understand the balance that President Biden is trying to reach. Hamas is a threat. Israel is threatened also by Iran and Hezbollah, deeply and profoundly. How does Israel manage that threat? Most of the reporting I see just doesn't even talk about the role that Hamas is playing in this. Right. The fact that there's a peace deal on the table. Sorry, a ceasefire deal on the table, I should say, that Israel has continually upped their side of it, and Hamas has continually said no. And I think part of the reason for that, the UN hasn't even condemned Hamas. Hamas feels like there is no pressure on them whatsoever and no incentive for them to get to a ceasefire.
I understand that.
So that's what we're trying to balance.
But we obviously hold an ally and a liberal democracy to a higher standard than we do a terror group. And the concern here is just the rising and almost unfathomable death toll among those in Gaza. And now you have a strike that kills aid workers. A close ally of President Biden, Democratic Senator Chris Coons, who I know you know well, he told CNN for the first time he's open now to applying conditions to aid for Israel. I want you to have a listen and see what your response is to that idea.
I have said, and others have said, if Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister, were to order the IDF into Rafah at scale, they were to drop 1,000-pound bombs and send in a battalion to go after Hamas and make no provision for civilians or for humanitarian aid, that I would vote to condition aid to Israel. The challenge is to make it clear that we support the Israeli people, that we want to and will continue to have a strong and close relationship with Israel, but that the tactics by which the current prime minister is making these decisions don't reflect the best values of Israel or of the United States.
That's really the question there. Do you agree, should Congress now condition aid to Israel on changes?
Well, I want to make one thing perfectly clear. I totally agree with you that we should hold Israel to a higher standard, absolutely, than Hamas. That's not my point. My point is that if Hamas is not participating in it, then it's not really a successful ceasefire. And that's part of the challenge. Yes, we should hold Israel to a higher standard, but what we want is a ceasefire that sticks. And if Hamas isn't willing to agree to it, and they attack, then Israel is going to respond. I will say, to Senator Coons's point, I think we're getting to the point where, yes, President Biden will have to apply greater pressure than he has, and potentially that may mean conditioning some of the assistance that he has been giving, because Israel is not doing enough to allow humanitarian assistance in. They are not doing enough to protect the humanitarian assistance that is in there, as the incredible tragedy of the strike on the World Food Kitchen shows. So yes, we have got to get Israel to change that aspect, and that may require more pressure than is currently being applied. I don't disagree with that at all.
I want to move on to Ukraine because that's an issue you follow closely. But before I go, just a political question. Do you believe that this issue, given the outrage from some in the Democratic Party against President Biden for his steadfast support for Israel, do you believe that he risks a political price for that support in this election?
Well, look, if you are president, if you are the incumbent running for re-election, you face issues like this all day long. It's part of the challenge of being in a responsible position. You've seen what, the presumptive Republican nominee, Donald Trump, has had to say about this, but he's not responsible for anything. So yes, the president being in a responsible position on this issue, on Ukraine, on 1,000 different things, it is a politically difficult thing to navigate, to govern effectively, to make the right decisions in the face of political pressure. So yeah, no, it's going to be part of the challenge in this election that President Biden faces, no doubt.
Now on Ukraine, U.S. and NATO officials are warning that Ukraine's shortage of ammunition, military equipment, is having an increasingly dire effect on the battlefield. And the fact is, they have been warning about this for months now, and now the delay in U.S. aid is months long. Do you see any concrete movement on unblocking funding? Do you have any confidence that the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, will actually bring something to the floor?
I do have some confidence on the latter question. At the moment, there has not been movement. And look, what you have to understand here, what Speaker Johnson wants to do, and he has said this publicly, he does not want to abandon Ukraine, but he wants to find a way to achieve that goal without causing more turmoil within his party. That's going to be very difficult to achieve. That's why he's trying to come up with all of these other options for what an aid package might look like, instead of doing what has to be done, which is to give us a vote on the Senate package that is already passed with 77 bipartisan votes in the Senate. So Johnson is still imagining that there's some other solution. But as you've seen, even to this moment, no other option has been presented by the House Republicans. And I think it is unlikely that they will be able to come up with one. The sooner he accepts that and gives us a vote on the Senate bill, that's when we get there. But that's the trap we're in right now. He said next week. So hopefully next week will be when we do get a vote. Goodness.
And meanwhile, soldiers are dying on the battlefield, Ukrainians. Congressman Adam Smith.
It could not be more urgent. Yeah. Absolutely.
No question. Congressman, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks, Joe.